evening. Good evening. I can think of no better way to conclude the ISU Martin Luther King birthday celebration than a presentation by tonight's speaker. Our speaker is Dr. Samuel Proctor, and I'd like to just say a couple of things about him, which would be an injustice because there's so much to say. He pastored the Abyssinia Baptist Church for years. He succeeded Adam Clayton Powell. And I feel especially warm and humbled tonight because one year my family decided to visit New York City. And my husband being a deacon of the church and I being the minister of music, wanted to attend worship services on Sunday morning. We decided to visit Harlem and chose Abyssinia. That year, that very Sunday, was the first Sunday that our speaker took the pulpit of the church. And I can't begin to tell you what a joyous feeling and message that was. For as he spoke, the choir sang a Negro spiritual that's composed by a Negro composer, Nathaniel Dett, Listen to the Lambs. So I feel very good tonight. When we talk about Dr. Martin Luther King, we must think of Samuel Proctor, for there are so many similarities. And I just think of their educational pursuits. When you think in terms of Crozer Seminary School and Boston University, both graduated from those institutions. When you think in terms of working with all levels of people, both have done that. Dr. Proctor has done extensive work with the Peace Corps abroad as well as at the national office in D.C. In addition, we're very proud of him because he has served as the president of a black college, North Carolina A&T. And I just have to say that again, North Carolina A&T. The beautiful thing about this person also, he has been awarded 22 honorary doctoral degrees, in addition to the ones that he earned himself. Please join me in welcoming our speaker, Dr. Samuel Proctor.
I'm very grateful to Dr. Alan Somerville for this extremely generous introduction. Grateful as well to Pat Miller for all of her patient care of the details involving my getting here. And this time of the year, travel is so precarious. TWA canceled the flights coming in here today. And really, I'm not supposed to be here. You're looking at a ghost. How it all worked out is really a miracle, but here I am. Grateful also to Dean Snyder for it was she who attended a conference in New Orleans some 2-3 years ago where I was the speaker. All of the deans of students gathered for their professional meeting, and I was lucky enough to be there to address them. And she thought enough of my work there to invite me to come to be here with you. And for that, I'm very grateful indeed. I was listening carefully to the things that were sorted out to say to you about me. I always do that. I write that stuff myself, and I mail it all around the country. It's curious about what people would think is important. And she mentioned those honorary degrees. I know you must wonder how those things come about. In fact, one is from Iowa. We have Cole College in Iowa, don't we?
Yes.
Yes, I'm an alumnus of Cole College also. But most of those honorary degrees are given in lieu of a decent fee for a commencement address. So if you give a lot of commencement addresses, you'll collect a lot of honorary degrees. You know, I'm retired now from a professorship at Rutgers University. This year has been a great year because I've been a visiting professor at Vanderbilt. I don't have to go to any committee meetings, don't have to vote on anything. I'm not bucking for tenure. I'm not going to get a reappointment, no raises. It's a good, relaxing feeling, you know. You can go on and tell the truth when you're in a situation like that. And I really do covet the opportunity to be with you, to talk with you as candidly as I know how about this outstanding personality who just straddled the decades of our time and made such an important contribution to our world. I want to talk to you not as though I were making some kind of a eulogistic presentation, but I want to talk with you as students, as persons with an honest curiosity about how things come to pass, you know. How does a person start out on even footing with all of the rest of us and then ends up with a national holiday in his honor and ends up with a Nobel Peace Prize and all of the people pausing to remember him at his birthday? Because you're young and you are career-driven, you don't know where you're going to end up. And I think that the study of the biography of other people is one of the most instructive ways of understanding history. I met Martin Luther King Jr. when he was a first-year student in the theological seminary at Chester, Pennsylvania, Crozer Seminary. I had gone to Crozer myself some 6 or 8 years earlier. I went back to give chapel talks. That's the way they do. They invite alumni to come back. And on one of those visits, a professor said to me, "Sam, you thought you were something when you were here, but we've got a hot one here now, this Martin Luther King Jr. from Atlanta." Well, I knew his father. His father was the pastor of the Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta. And all of us who were young Baptist ministers knew his grandfather, Dr. A.D. Williams, who was a civil rights leader in Atlanta, a stalwart, a tall, influential preacher. You see, there's a kind of a tight circle among black people in this country, as there would be among any people, but we were forced to come closer together by virtue of our survival interest. And so at a certain point in your life, suddenly you know everybody. You have to know, because you get around, you meet people, and your whole career depends upon making these contacts. So I knew Dr. A.D. Williams Sr., I knew Dr. Martin Luther King Sr., and I knew his mother. His mother was a graduate of Spelman College. Now, if you say his daddy finished Morehouse and his mother finished Spelman, you're already talking about a very special kind of person. For those of you who may not know, these colleges came into being during the Reconstruction in this country, when a great many Northerners came to the South to establish institutions to train the recently freed black population across the South. You'd be shocked to know how some of those colleges began. And just the story of the founding of the colleges would give anyone inspiration who had finished. For example, my school was started in a jail. In a jail. A man named Lumpkin owned a jail for incorrigible slaves. Incorrigible slaves, slaves who didn't want to be slaves, and who did something about it. I mean, as I often say, they talk about those 3 Hebrew children in the fiery furnace, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. I said, that's not the way to say that. It was Shadrach, Meshach, and a bad Negro. He didn't want to be there. Mr. Lumpkin was paid by the slave owners to keep the bad slaves, like breaking a wild horse, you know. Now, when slavery ended, Mr. Lumpkin did not need the jail because there were no more slaves, and the jail was up for sale. The Black Baptists of Virginia sold fish, baked pies and cakes, and gathered their missionary pennies to start a college. Isn't it interesting how people think that black folk did not want to learn or could not learn? And black folks started 110 colleges right after slavery all across the South. And secondary schools, because they didn't have high schools in most places. The black people had their money together, wanted to start a college. Nobody would rent a building. Nobody would sell a building. And somebody said, "Old man Lumpkin's jail is for sale. Can you make a college out of a jail?" "We can." They bought the jail, 14th and Broad in Richmond, Virginia. What they called the 14th Street Bottom. And they took out the bars. They took all of those chains and all of those whipping posts, and destroyed them, made classrooms out of the cells, and the great big open area where they used to whip the slaves, turned that into an auditorium and a chapel, and took a big old whipping post, a big iron post, and put a top on it and made a lectern out of that. Can't you see a jail being converted into a college for recently freed slaves? Morehouse College started very much the same way, in the basement of a church. So was Spelman College, started in the same way. Henry L. Morehouse, for whom the school is named, was raising money for that school. And somebody asked him, "Why are you raising money to build a liberal arts college for young black boys right off the farms in Georgia?" And Morehouse gave this reply that I have remembered for many, many years. Morehouse said that he was assured of the capacity of the black man to be educated and to acquire all of the cultural accoutrements of anybody else. Not of being foreordained to be a hew of wood and a draw of water for the white race predestined to irrevocable inferiority, but a being whose mind and soul could expand indefinitely, to comprehend the great things of God, and to take a place of usefulness and honor in the world's activities. And if you awakened me 4 o'clock in the morning and asked me, "Sam, what did Morehouse say?" I could tell you. Because way back in 1885, a white man raising money for a college for black fellows in Georgia, making a statement like that, contrary to all popular belief, that was significant for me. Morehouse College began and then took an early lead, and so many of the outstanding black leaders of our time are graduates of Morehouse College. So many of the women who are outstanding are graduates of Spelman College. So King started off with a great advantage. Now, the frank truth is, there's no need in anybody saying that he was poor and disadvantaged, because he was not. When I met him, young fella, right out of college, he was wearing hot shaft and mark suits and Florsheim shoes and had an automobile. I never heard anybody say he had a job. I mean, I've read a lot about King, but all of us carried papers, waited table, did something. But I'm saying that so you can account for this meteoric rise of this young man. He never had to work his way through school. He was not impeded by anything like that. He could live with books and ideas all the time. In fact, I don't remember him telling jokes or having any light, trivial conversation. All of those years that I knew him, and I knew him well, you would start talking with him. We called him Mike. "Mike, how you doing?" "Sam, fine." "How are things going with you?" "All right." "Sam, can I ask you something?" "Yeah, what?" "Do you think God gave us the best possible of all worlds These are the kind of questions he would ask, you know. He didn't ask you who won the Super Bowl, you know, or is God just and fair and all powerful, and why do good people suffer? These are the issues that he talked about all the time. He was born grown, old. Now, they tell me he liked to play basketball. I hardly believe that because he was so short. He couldn't play much basketball, you know. And King brought to his task this kind of intellectual acumen and seriousness and devoted it all to the struggles for his people. Now, when he left Troza Seminary, I never will forget those conversations. He would write to me. We didn't do much telephoning in those days. Nobody had that kind of money. Telephoning was very expensive. He would say, "Where do you think I should go for my PhD degree?" Well, Chicago had a graduate school of religion, but it was cold and formal. Boston University, filled with Methodists on their way to becoming bishops, a very live and warm place. Harvard had all but closed down their graduate studies in theology. There were just a few. Yale, where I had gone first, it was alive, congregational, and I said to him, if you really want to find the most vigorous program in social ethics, which was his interest, you should go to Boston University. I had finished my doctor's degree there, and I told him the people to write to. He did it, and the next thing I knew, he was there and making a marvelous record for himself. Everything he went about doing turned to be successful. And of course, that was indeed the Morehouse spirit. The Morehouse spirit was not to talk a whole lot about, how much oppression there was, this sort of thing. They taught fellas to go out and conquer and end up on the other side as leaders and change the world from a position of strength and leadership. That was the Morehouse spirit. I'll never forget going down there one year. They gave a Founders Day speech. And they scared me to death. When I finished, the president came up to the lectern. All these Morehouse men, about 800 or 900 of them sitting out there in that brand new chapel. He said, if there's a river, and they all answered, we'll cross it. If there's a problem, we'll solve it. If there's a disease, we'll heal it. They went on like that for the longest time. I scratched my head. I said, this is not a college. This is a cult. This is some kind of a harder. And they did that to imbue them with a spirit of achievement, a spirit of victory. That's the way they were educated. He went to Boston University. Now let me tell you what he used to say all the time. He used to say, Sam, I want to be an intellectual black Baptist preacher like Howard Thurman and Benjamin Mays and Vernon Johns. He knew the names of all of them. He didn't plan on getting arrested. He didn't plan on running a bus boycott. Here was a young man who clearly set his sights on the image of the person he wanted to be. He wanted to be a philosopher preacher, going around lecturing in important places. He used to joke about it. He wanted to wear one of those black coats with the ribbing around it, and the split tail and the long split down the back, the little buttons back there, cane striped trousers, and those black shoes that preachers get from somewhere. I don't know where they buy them with the toes that turn up in front. I didn't find any of them that would fit me, but he wanted to look like that. He practiced oratory. He was a normal person. He was a normal person. He didn't drop out of the skies. He had that kind of vanity and ego need to want to be something special, and he was preparing for it. Sometimes those thoughts come back to my mind now when I hear him being discussed, and I think of how simple-mindedly innocent he was in those days when he came out of graduate school. In his late 20s, with a PhD, went down to be the pastor of the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church in Montgomery, Alabama. Now, that church had been served by the very kind of man he said he wanted to be. A man named Vernon Johns, very intellectually trained black Baptist minister. You know, the Baptists come in all sizes and shapes. You got low Baptists and middle Baptists and high Baptists, and that church was a high Baptist church. Vernon Johns had finished the Oberlin Graduate School of Theology and was a very, very rigorously intellectual Baptist preacher, and King followed him. And the whole faculty from Alabama State College around the corner went to church there. Not all of them, but a great many of them. And the president of the college, H. Council Trenholm, attended church there. And you talking about a rigid, tough-minded man. Do you know I gave a commencement address for Alabama State College back in those days when King was there? And I had my little speech, and I had to stick to my manuscript, and because I was scared to death. I was a young college president, and Dr. Trenholm was so straight watching me, you know. And then he got up to give out the diplomas. 225 graduates. I lie not to you, my young friends at Iowa State University. That man called everybody's name and middle name without looking at a note. H. Council Trenholm. Now, some folks said that's all he could do was to memorize it. When you saw him do that, that was the end. I don't believe that. Those people were just jealous because they couldn't do it. But he used to be the registrar when his father was the president, H. Council Trenholm Sr. He inherited the college. Things like that happened all the time in those days. He was a registrar. And when he used to be the registrar, he developed a habit of learning the students. So when he became the president, I felt sorry for that registrar because he just stayed in the registrar's office all the time. He went on and learned everybody there. That was the funniest feeling I've had. You mean this man is the president of this country? He knows all of the seniors' names. What about the other students going to graduate next? You're going to learn all those names. He knew them, knew what town they had come from and all of that. Now that man was an officer in King's Church. And he made all of the people in this college come to that church. King said to me one day, Sam, I've got 39 PhDs at my church. I said, now how many Christians have you got in your church? But he bragged about having all of these high baccalaureate PhDs in his church. Now, he didn't know that I knew why they were there. They were there because the president of the college was there. And if you wanted to get tenure and keep your job over there in the college, you had to come over to the church and sing all the hymns and be on all the committees, you see. You either earn your tenure in the church as well as over there in the college. We had a good time teasing and joking about these matters. Now, King had it all set, well on his way to becoming that person that he had envisioned, just like you right now. In the privacy of your dormitory room, of your apartment. You'd be silly if you didn't sit down and etch out the person you would like to be at age 35. You need to do that. That's what will make you get those term papers done, you know, pass those examinations. If you have no vision of what you want to be, I feel sorry for you. You may not tell anyone, but King told everyone what he wanted to be, and he was on his way. Now, that's the picture I want to have you hold in your mind. A person self-consciously directing his life in pursuit of goals that were justifiable, but with a considerable amount of self-regard and vanity. Wanting to stand out as a Morehouse man and really unique as a young black Baptist preacher with a PhD degree in the philosophy of religion at Boston University. One day, Rosa Parks was riding home from a white neighborhood. In those days, would someone close that door, please? Thank you. In those days, black people would get on a bus and fill it up from the rear forward. White people would fill it up from the front backwards. And as people do in a society like that, you know, they learn what the customs are, and they take some things for granted. If there are not many people on the bus, then sit anywhere near the middle if you want. It doesn't matter. Generally, the bus driver paid it no mind. He knew everyone who got on the bus anyway. And the only time it would make a problem would be if someone got on the bus and said, I want to sit back there, and that black fellow, that black woman is sitting too far front. Then the bus driver would go back and have to straighten it out, and that was rare, but it did happen from time to time. Now, Rosa Parks got on the bus. She was a seamstress. She sewed for a rich family. In those days, people with money didn't buy dresses off the rack or coats. They had their coats and dresses made. And their children had their coats and dresses made also. And a lot of black women made a good living by being a seamstress. They would make a better living than they would, being a maid or some other kind of laundress or what have you. Rosa Parks was a woman of some standing in town. She belonged to the NAACP, the Montgomery Improvement Association, the church. Everybody knew her. She wore no makeup, and a lot of women were like that in those days. She wore no makeup at all. No big, religious taboo. She just wanted to be plain. No lipstick. She combed her hair back in a bun and had a big celluloid comb back there. I can see her face right now. Steel-rimmed eyeglasses, those energetic shoes with heels just so high, no chewing gum, nothing like that, and soft-spoken. You would have thought that bus driver might have said to himself, now that's a respectable-looking woman. I'm not going to bother her. And some man got on there and complained that she was sitting too far front. He wanted to sit where she was sitting, and the bus driver felt compelled to ask her to move. I often wonder if it ever occurred to him what the consequences might have been. Evidently, he was one of those persons who thought that if you saw one black person, you'd seen them all. There was no need to make any distinctions among them, because the most important thing about them is race. That's what racism is, isn't it? Racism is when the most significant characteristic of a person is his or her race. Never mind character, intellectual capacity, economic success, any other thing. If you're black, you're black. Colored, you're colored. That's the way he thought, and went back there to ask her to move. I don't know what got into her. I don't understand why she did it. I don't know if anybody really knows, because no one was on there to judge. When she made her remarks, nobody was there except Rosa Parks, white people all around the bus. And she was speaking softly to the bus driver. But she tells us that she said, I'm sorry, I cannot move anymore. It was as though she was saying, this thing has gone far enough. And let me amplify that. We've been to court. We've won 39 cases before the Supreme Court. Our finest lawyers, Thurgood Marshall, James Naisbitt, Spotswood Robinson, they've been in and out of federal courts all across the South. They've won 39 cases. Some of you looking for a term paper topic, take that one and talk about the 39 cases black folk won before the Roosevelt Court, before the Supreme Court decision of 1954. 39 victories. We sued our way into graduate schools, into restaurants, into cemeteries, concert halls, everything. Pullman cars, everything. Won them all, and still no significant, no basic change in the mores. Rosa Parks said, I cannot move today. It seems like a lot of history just poured into one moment right there. Sort of like the people cutting the head off of Charles I in England, and then democracy just flowing forth, breaking out all over. Finally, the king's head had to be cut off and rolled down a hill somewhere. Rosa Parks said, not today. And the man had her arrested. Word came uptown what had happened, and the most conservative people, college professors, they're not ready to be radicalized like that, people who read all the time and get lost in the paralysis of analysis. They don't do those sorts of things, start a big boycott. They try to think their way through and look for other methods. But the most placid and conservative of those people decided that we cannot behave as usual now. Rosa Parks has been arrested. She's the best we've got. Now, I know some women down in Norfolk where I grew up who might have been on that bus. And if that bus driver had asked them to move, they wouldn't have been in the civil rights movement. Because they would have said to him, if you want me to move, you move me. And he would have started a fight or gone running for his life. I know some of them that just wouldn't take anything off anybody like that. Just reach in their pocketbook and pull out an apple and throw it up in the air, and then reach in her bosom and pull out a razor and peel it on the way down and say, now, you want me to move, you move me. And if that had happened, I'd still be the post office in Norfolk right now. No movement whatsoever. But Rosa Parks bore in her life the dynamism of respectability and character and all of these things. These were not, just qualities that were static. These were qualities that motivated people, moved people. So at the meeting that night, I heard King talk about that a lot of times, many a time. At the meeting that night, they said, who's going to be the leader? We've got to do something about that bus company. And they went all around the room. One guy said, I just bought a farm, just got a big mortgage. I can't lead in the movement. Another one said, my wife just got a brand new job teaching school. I can't lead it. Another one said, I've got a heavy mortgage on my property downtown, and the bank could call it in. Everybody had an excuse. And King was telling us how he was tightening up all the time. All of his plans about being a systematic theologian and a philosopher, his plans about going from campus to campus, lecturing about Kant's categorical imperative and Hegel's thesis, antithesis, and all that sort of, all of these things were about to be blown right away. He was going to have to go out here and lead a bus boycott. And when the time came for them to ask him, would you do it, Mike? And he accepted and said he would. He told us about how he went home that night and prayed so earnestly. He knew his family would be in danger and all of that, and surely they were. He had no idea that within a very short while, he would never see those mature years that he yearned to see. His head would be almost blown off by a high-powered rifle bullet. He did not see that on the horizon. He knew things would change. He started out systematically organizing the boycott. I was at Virginia Union then, and I had him up for a religious emphasis week. At that time, we used to have programs like that on our campuses. We'd bring in some minister who could really speak to the college mind, and would have that minister conduct services on the campus for a week. He came up for me to do that. He invited me to come down to Montgomery to do what he called the spring lecture series. See, he had a high Baptist church. He didn't want to have a revival, too much noise and carrying on, He wanted a spring lecture series for those high baccalaureate, those PhDs at his church. So I went down and did it. In the first year was there, and the next year they invited me to come back. So I stayed in that little ragged house he had. You know how Baptist people give you a parsonage, little ragged house they put the preacher in. And I stayed there with him. And he just had one baby at that time, one young child, this older son. And one night, he was asleep, I was asleep. We'd been in church, and all day long we were tied up with this bus boycott business. And the deacons in the church were keeping watch because threats were coming from everywhere. And of course, I wasn't accustomed to sleeping in a house, where people had planned to blow it up in the middle of the night. I was sleeping with one eye closed and one eye open, and one ear open. And one of those deacons fell asleep, had a softball bat in between his knees, and the bat hit that porch, your porch with no bottom underneath it, just boards. It makes a lot of noise, Bam-a-lam-a-lam. I thought that was it, I jumped up, went out front. The deacon had awakened himself, I'm sorry, I hope I didn't wake up Dr. King. No, he's still sleeping. And so we chatted for a moment. I went back, and King was not asleep. The light was on underneath his door. It was such a cheaply made house, had a great big 1-inch gap underneath the door, You could see the light just pouring out. I knocked on the door. Mike, you there? You all right? Yes, Sam, come on in. Coretta was asleep on the way, on the edge of the bed, almost falling out. He was over here. I think she was trying to avoid that light. He had a lamp on the floor. This was about 3 o'clock in the morning. Let me tell you about Martin Luther King. He was reading Paul Tillich's book entitled Courage to Be, 3 o'clock in the morning in the middle of the bus boycott. Isn't that something? And with all of that tension and anxiety, I thought he would be sleeping like a rock at night. And there he was reading Tillich's Courage to Be in the middle of the night. That's the kind of person he was, an extremely well-disciplined mind. We had to get gasoline. The people around there wouldn't sell the black people gasoline because they wanted to break up the bus boycott. And black people were carting folk to work in their cars. So we had to go to Tuskegee to get the gas. Tuskegee is a black town, where Tuskegee Institute, Tuskegee University now, is located. And it's about a 30-mile run from over there in Montgomery. And I'll never forget that ride. King had an old second-hand at Pontiac station wagon. He always had a car, but not much of a car. It was always one his daddy had or his granddaddy had. They'd pass it on to him. It was one of those Pontiacs with all those big chrome stripes in the back. I forgot what they called it, some fancy name, but it looked terrible when it was out of style. It looked like a hearse, So there we were riding in that thing going over to Tuskegee. State trooper picked us up. That state trooper stayed about 1 yard off the tail of King's car, all the way from Montgomery into Tuskegee, just to rattle him, to frighten him. Perspiration was beading on his forehead. His hands were just wet. And we stopped talking because we thought it might have been a trick to cause him to do something to get the policeman to jump out and shoot him or what have you. We got to Tuskegee, greatly relieved, went and met the people who sold the gasoline, made some arrangements with them, stayed around talking. On the way back, we thought we'd have a relaxed ride. The trooper had waited, came out right behind. I say this to let you know that when you see people's pictures in the magazines of one kind of hero or another, you don't just do that like somebody on a screen in television or in a play. It's real. These are the things he lived with for some 15 years, day after day after day. Harassment, intimidation, all the time. Now, in the midst of all of this, he became elevated to be the president of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. His movement spread, and soon he became known as the new black leader. And that's interesting. It's interesting how personalities like that emerge. I've seen a lot of them. Douglas Wilder, the black governor of Virginia, was my student in philosophy at Virginia Union. He went to sleep in my philosophy class one day. I don't know. I could not feel it. I talked so loud, I don't know how you could go to sleep in that class. But I saw Doug Wilder as a youngster, just like these young fellas in my class, bright, determined, very poor, working in the hotel, late for class because he had to trot to class from the hotel, busting the dishes after lunch. My class was 1:30. He was always late. And a couple of times he dropped off to sleep because he'd waited at the table for the banquet the night before. Always sweaty, grimy, dirty. And downtown at that hotel where he worked, right at 5th and Franklin, when he was putting out the garbage at night, I've driven by there recently and watched that thing. I parked my car. I said, now when Doug Wilder was 18 years old putting out the garbage, if he had looked right down Franklin Street, he could have seen the governor's mansion. There it is. He could have seen the lights going on and off in the governor's bedroom while putting out the garbage at night. 18 years old, grimy, dirty. The last one hired, the one to put out the garbage at night. That's what he would have done. I knew. I used to do it myself. All of us went through that. And I parked myself, isn't that interesting? Doug Wilder could have seen the governor's mansion. And now he's sleeping in the governor's mansion. Jesse Jackson was my quarterback when I was president of A&T College. Jesse was the president of my student body. Every time I cranked my car to go somewhere, Jesse wanted to ride. Wanted to talk about this and that and the other. I didn't know he wanted my job. I thought he just loved me, wanted to ride, I wouldn't look near as old as I look now if I hadn't had Jesse as the president of the student body at A&T College. I have seen these careers take shape. I have seen them respond to issues and opportunities. You can't wake up one morning and say, hey, Mama, I'm going to start today. I'm going to be great. Okay, Mom? Not like that. You just go on and do your work. Do the best you can. One opportunity opens up here. Another one opens up there. And then they start pyramiding. The next thing you know, there's a big opportunity right in front of you. And if you have done well in all of this and you're well rehearsed, and if you have the discipline and the sense of commitment, you may go on and be something enormously great. But if you're eaten up with egotism and selfishness and you always are trying to duck hard challenges, you don't get to be great like that. You know, people have a way of selecting those whom they wish to make great. And King stood up to the challenges that came. He responded with courage. And the next thing we knew, they were asking him to head the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. Now, King did his part for his day. You know the rest of the story. The question is, what is the King legacy now, and what does it mean to us, those of us who follow? What does the King legacy say to us? If he were here today, what would be the great concerns? Now, you do know that things have changed a great deal. In some senses, racism is still pervasive and endemic in the land, but not in the ways that I knew when I was young and growing up. I could not even apply to go to the University of Virginia. They were not allowed to process my application. I had to go to a black college. No black person could go to VPI when I was a youngster. It just was not allowed. My father drove a truck in the Navy Yard for 42 years because no black person was allowed to have a job any better than that in the Navy Yard while they were building ships for World War II. There were very rigid restrictions on what we could and could not do. And for about 25 or 30 years, we fought against these in court. We sang against them and prayed and walked in, sat in, prayed in, and everything. Many of those things have been removed. And yet here we are with this pervasive racism, the stigma, the stereotypes continuing in our society. So you see, the strategy would have to be different, wouldn't it? Because today you're dealing with some targets that are so nebulous and so amorphous, you don't know where to march. You know, how do you march against sin? You know, how do you march against prejudice? Now, if they had a restaurant that you could not attend, that wouldn't welcome you, you could march against that. If some school would not admit you, march against that. Some corporation wouldn't give any black people a job, march against that. But those kinds of targets, you see, were taken care of. Now something far more subtle that pervades the land. And that means that anybody who wants to lead today will have to address these issues. This does not respond quite so easily to the kind of oratory and the kind of pinpointing that we used to know about. No, this is a different kind of a strategy that's called for right now. And I'm awfully afraid that it has gotten a lot of people so completely disillusioned. I have a class at Rutgers University. When you retire, if they make you emeritus, they put a burden on you. You got to do something because they give you a secretary, and a parking place and a library card and call you Professor Emeritus. And you feel like a fool if you don't make some contribution to the school. So I offered a course and I'm teaching. And I didn't know that many students would come because I was so old and tired, but 174 came to my class. And the hard thing about teaching that class is they don't understand where my enthusiasm comes from at my age. They say to me, Dr. Proctor, how can you be filled with hope about the future as bad as things are in New Jersey and in America? And what I want to say to them is, I don't understand how you could have given up at age 19. You've just started. You don't know what this journey is going to be like. And I say to them, I thank God I didn't have anybody to talk to me telling me the stuff you listen to today, because I would have shot myself. I wouldn't have had the guts to grow up. I didn't have anybody to tell me that there was no hope at all for the future. Everybody that I met said to me, this country's messed up. Racism is everywhere. But fella, if you buckle down and work, you'll be able to come out here and help us to get rid of it. But if you come out of here ignorant and cynical and filled with hatred and tired, you can't help anybody. Somebody told me that if I kept on rooting and digging, I could get to a position where I could help a lot of other young people to get over and help them to help others to get over. And that's what propelled my career and made me do the things that I felt called to do. I'm so glad nobody ever told me I couldn't do anything. I saw a young Nigerian in my class at Vanderbilt. I'm doing a visiting professorship there. And he said to me, did you know Professor Dahunsi? I said, yes. He said, he taught me. Dahunsi taught you? Yes. He was my professor. And how did you get in touch? He said, I lived in a little bush village in Nigeria, and Professor Dahunsi would come out there and gather up the smart young fellows and bring them to the seminary, and I was one of those that he brought. He said, did you know Chief Orinde? Yes, I knew Chief Orinde. Chief Orinde finished my college in 1911. He's been in the village all the time, and Dahunsi came up under him, and then I came up under Dahunsi. I said, I taught Dahunsi myself. You taught Dahunsi? You taught my professor? Yes, I taught him Greek, taught him philosophy, taught him homiletics, taught him how to drive a car, taught him how to paint my house because he got broke. And I said, I'll let you in. He messed my house up completely. I had to hire somebody else to paint it behind him. But I taught your Nigerian professor when he was 24 years old how to paint my house. And he was driving my Mercury and ran over curbstone and knocked the front end out of line. He never knew it. I got it fixed. He said, oh, Professor Proctor. He's right down at Vanderbilt right now in my class. Oh, Professor Proctor, you taught my Professor Dahunsi. Yes. And he says, and Dahunsi, he was taught by Chief Orinde. You know about, he finished our college way before I came along. See how you hook these things up together and you create a certain kind of human capital. Now suppose there was no Sam Proctor around to teach Dahunsi at all. And Dahunsi had to stay over there and not get an opportunity. What a terrible mess that would be. Thank God nobody ever told me that I couldn't learn, I couldn't do, and I couldn't help a Dahunsi to go back to Nigeria and send another bright young fellow over here like I have in my class. He's going to be somebody as bright as he can be. He comes about because of all of that. Well, Martin Luther King responded to his challenge. And what about us today? I see the first and the main challenge, if you would allow me to summarize, the main challenge is for our young people to learn how to hold on to their aspirations and their courage, no matter how cynical this whole thing may appear to be, no matter how futile it may appear to be. I believe in novelty in history. I believe in novelty in history. I read the other day that General Motors had sent to Illinois to bring a young black engineer back from Navistar building international trucks back to Detroit to be the chief engineer for all Cadillac production. I never thought I would live to see the day when a newspaper would say that a young black man from Detroit, Michigan was in charge of all Cadillac production in the world. My goodness, I'm going out and buying me a hog right now. A man got fired on the television for saying that black folk couldn't be quarterbacks. I thought I would think of it. Here I was growing up, black folk couldn't even play ball anywhere. No professional ball anywhere. You could look at it, hear about it, you couldn't play. Now, a white man says on television, black guys can't think fast enough to be quarterbacks. And they fired him. I never thought I would live to see the day come when that would happen. And another man said, blacks can't be pitchers. They can run and knock folk down and hit the ball, but they can't be scientific enough to throw that ball 90 miles an hour. And he got fired for saying that. And the next thing I knew, a black